Welcome everyone to Mastering the Art of Isometric Room Design in Blender 3. And here you can see we're actually in Blender now, and what I want to do first of all is just take you through a few things that you're going to need that accompany the course. So one of those things will be, for instance, the download pack. So let's take a quick look at the download pack before we carry on. So here inside the download pack you will see three different items. One of them is textures, one of them is a reference, and the other one is something called PureRev. Now PureRev is a free piece of software that you can download from their website, and basically what it does is it allows you to actually copy different images and things like that, which you can then use for referencing. It's really an amazing tool, and it's one that we use here at 3D Tutor a lot of the time. So if you click on PureRev, you'll see that when I open this up, so if I double click this, this is where it opens up as. And this basically is a visual guide for what we'll be creating when we actually come to creating a certain pot. So you can see here we've got a chair, we've got how the wood is actually going to go in the actual roof, we've got a telescope, laptop, items, things like that. So it's really handy to have a few references before you begin creating your own scene. So once you've actually finished this course, you should be able to move on and create your own isometric rooms from scratch, you know, down to your own design. So that's what actually this is for. All right, if we put that down and we go back to our download pack, you will see in there we've also got a reference. Now this reference is the room that I already built, and the reason that you might want this is you might want it just to follow it along. So if I bring this over now, you can see this is the room that I actually created. So you should be able to open this up in Blender, which I'll show you how to do in a few minutes, and then you should be able to follow along to what we're actually creating. Now I'm actually not going to have my reference in my actual Blender. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just have this open on my other screen on the left hand side, because I find that personally much easier to reference from. Now of course when you come to build your own isometric rooms, you're not going to have a reference like this or anything like that. So again, that's why it's really important to just gather a load of references like we have done it in PureRev, put them all together, and then you can come up with some great ideas. Now the other thing is what we're going to discuss is the sizing of the room. I tend to work with a realistic size. We're also going to actually bring in a human OBJ just to make sure the sizing's correct, and you can then use this as well for when you come to create your own isometric rooms. So you'll also see in your download pack one that says human reference, and this is basically the guy that we're going to bring in. The other thing you'll see in your download pack is textures. Now, a lot of the actual materials we are going to create just in Blender itself, but it's always great if you can actually get a few textures to actually accompany your actual builds, because it just really brings out the features in your own isometric room. So basically you can see here we've got one that says bed sheets, and when you open that you will see that we can see one here that's the bed sheets. Now this one is pretty much a seamless texture. In other words, you can actually pull it out and it will actually go together very seamlessly. That's exactly the same as well for things like the floor wood. So the floor wood, if I double click this, open it up, you can see again this is a seamless texture. Now the other ones we've got are called atlases. So if we go into this one here, furniture wood, you'll see that when I open up this, that we have all of these different actual textures together, and we basically place in our UV maps over whichever part it is. So if it's a chalkboard, we're going to place our UV map over there. So this is what the difference is. You can't actually stretch these out. They're not actually seamless. They're called basically a atlas map. They're a bit like trim sheets, but obviously not going across the side, because on trim sheets you do have some way to actually make them kind of seamless, but on these they're actually just an atlas. So that's that explained. Now what we're going to do now is I'm just going to put this down, and we're actually going to come into our Blender file, and the first thing now I'm going to do is I'm going to actually play a short video called Blender Basics, and what that's going to do is it's just going to take you through step by step how to actually move around Blender, how the camera controls works and things like that before we get started. This is mainly for someone who's actually brand new to Blender. If you're not brand new to Blender and you already know all that stuff, then move on to lesson 2. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Basics of Blender part of the course. I recommend grabbing a pen and paper or a Word document and jotting down these keyboard shortcuts. Here we'll be going through the very basics of Blender and the keyboard shortcuts you will need. So with all that said, let's get started. So on the left hand side, you'll see I have key casting on. This will show you the keys I'm pressing in real time And this will be on pretty much, if not all, of the entire course. The next thing I'd like to show you is any new keys we use, there will be a small animation that will appear down at the bottom right hand corner. This will only appear the first time we use that particular new key, and I think it really helps keep the flow of the lessons to a decent rate, both for beginners and those more familiar with Blender. Because they only appear once, they won't clutter up the screen, and there's always screencasting to rely on. Also down the bottom right hand side, you'll see a detailed animation of anything that needs more context. This is useful if you're new to 3D modeling in particular, because there's a lot of jargon and technical terms that need a decent explanation or more context of why we are doing something. I recommend then, if you need more information, jumping onto the Blender website and checking out their detailed explanations of pretty much anything Blender related. So now, when we mention Blender viewport, this is actually a viewport. You can see it. All of this grey area here is actually a viewport. Now, if we go to the UV editing bar up here, you'll see that over the left hand side, it's now in 2 screens. And if I say the UV editing viewport, all that means is just this grey box over here. So now let's go back to modeling and let's go a little bit further into how to move around in actual Blender. So the first thing I will discuss is that the middle mouse button, actually if you hold it down, you can rotate anywhere within the Blender viewport. And then if you want to zoom, it's just scrolling in and scrolling back. Now you can also press Ctrl Shift and the middle mouse, hold it down and then just push it forward or push it back, and you can scroll in very, very slowly. Now to pan, all you need to do is you need to hold Shift button and the middle mouse, and then you can pan from left to right. And to zoom to the object, which is very handy, let's say you're really far out and you really need to zoom to it, all you need to do is press the dot on the actual number pad, and that will zoom you right in to the object you want to zoom to. So for instance, if I'm zoomed out and I want to zoom to my light, for instance, it's very easy then to come across the scene collection, click on your light, press the dot on the number pad, and that will zoom you right in. Now the next thing we need to discuss is just deleting objects. So to click on an object, it's just left click, and then what you can press is you can press the delete key, and that will just delete it out of the way. So I've just deleted my light there, and now I'm going to come across to my camera and actually delete that out of the way as well. So the next thing I want to discuss is if we click on this cube and we press Shift D, what you'll notice if you move the mouse now, it's actually going to make a duplication of my actual cube. If I don't actually click anything on my mouse and I just click the right click button, it will drop that back in place. Now you can't see there's actually 2 cubes here at the moment, but there actually is. So we need to bring in a gizmo, and the gizmo is basically something that we can move things left and right, up and down, things like that. So if I press Shift Spacebar, come down, and you'll see we've got one that says move, and now we actually have our gizmo. And if I pull this to the right hand side, you can see now we can pull this away, and now we're able to move this around. You can also freely move this as well. If you press the G key, you'll notice if you've got it selected now, you can move it basically anywhere around the viewport. You can drop it back with the right click, or you can put it wherever you want it. So G, and then you click left click, and it will put it wherever I wanted it. Now also, why the dot button, the zoom to button, is important is if I press the dot button now, you will see that if I just zoom out and hold the middle mouse and rotate around, you'll see that I actually rotate around the origin of this actual cube. Now if I click on the other cube and I press the dot button, you can see now that I'm actually rotating around the origin of this cube. Now the next thing we want to discuss is object mode and edit mode. At the moment we are in object mode. We can't really do a lot with this cube except move it around. Now if I press the tab button, we will then go into edit mode, and in edit mode we can actually do a lot more things with this cube. So up on the top left hand side here, you will see that we've got 3 different icons. One of them, this one here, is vertices, the next one across is edges, and the next one across is face. Now if we're on vertices and we come over to this vertex for instance, I then, if I press Shift Spacebar to bring in my gizmo again, I then can move this around. Now if I come into edge select, I can grab the whole edge and move this around like so. Finally, if I come into face select, I can now grab a whole face and move it around like so. Now the other thing is, if we come to our vertex select, I can select a vertex. You can also select another vertex or another object or something else like that just by holding the shift button and actually clicking on the other vertex or the other object, or if we come to face select for instance, we can grab this face, shift select the second face, and this is how we can select multiple objects. Now the next thing we need to discuss is the axis. So we can see here we have a red axis and a green axis. Now just to show you what this actually relates to, if we come up on the top right hand side here where you've got these two interlocking balls and you click this little down arrow, you will see that we can turn on the Z axis. Now we're just going to turn this on just to show you what I mean. So if I turn that on now, you'll see another axis appears here. Now the green axis is representation of the Y. So if I want to scale this out on the Y, all I would have to press is S and Y, and now you can see I can scale it out along that axis. Now if I want to scale it out on the X, so that's the red axis, I'd press S and X and I can scale it out along that axis. And again, the same thing. So S and Z, the up and down axis is Z, and it's S and Z, and then you can scale it up and down. Finally as well, this is also important if we actually want to rotate it, because we'll rotate it on an actual axis. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the whole of this by pressing the A button, and then I'm going to rotate it round. So I want to rotate it on the Y axis, so it's R, Y, and then you can see it will only rotate on the Y axis, and no matter where I put my mouse, it will always rotate on that axis. To click it back to where it was, just again, the right click, and if you want to turn it, all you need to press is R and Y again, and then let's give it a degrees. So all we're going to do is we're going to press 90 on the actual number pad, so 90, enter button, and now you'll see it's rotated by 90 degrees. So just to summarize that, S is scale and R is rotate. Normally when we scale something or we rotate something, it's followed by the actual axis and then it's followed by a number, specifically when we rotate something. Normally when we scale something, we just hit scale, pull the mouse out and we'll scale it up. When we rotate something, it's normally R followed by the axis, followed by a number on the number pad. So now the last thing I want to discuss is if we go to object mode now, we need a way to actually view this a little bit easier than the way it is at the moment. Let's first of all turn off the Z axis, and what we'll do now is we'll use the number pad to actually view this. So if I press 1 on the number pad, that will go actually into the front view of our viewport. If I press 3 on the number pad, that will go into the side view, and if I press 7 on the number pad, that will go into the top view of our viewport. Now the opposite, to get to the opposite, all you need to do is you need to hold Control. So in this occasion we'll press Control and 7, and that will bring us to the bottom of this object in the viewport. Control 1 is the rear of the object, and Control 3 is the opposite side of the object. So now before we finish this section of the course, I need to show you something that's also very important. So if we come up to the top left hand side, you'll see you've got a button here that says Edit, and if we come down to Preferences, one thing that you should always do, that when you first download a Blender, you should always put on the status bar, which is this button here. And if I click all of these on, you will see now, if I click them all on and I close that down at the bottom right hand side here, you have all the details that you need. So for instance, we've got how many faces and how many triangles are actually in the scene, how many objects are in the scene, and the memory and VRAM that's actually taken up. This is really important if you want to get a good idea of how much power your computer is actually using and how many polygons and triangles are in the scene. Polygons and triangles you'll learn more about as we progress through the course. And that pretty much covers the basics of Blender, and I hope you all found that both helpful and informative, but more importantly, easy to understand. So now, as they say, on with the show. Alright everyone, so I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks a lot, bye bye.